Thank you for having me too. I'm super excited. So my name is Isabella. I am from Colombia. I was raised in Colombia, but I currently live in Miami. I love playing tennis, playing piano, and more recently I've been getting really into a lot of sciencey and technical stuff, specifically around AI more recently, but also around material science and electrochemistry. And the first time I used AI was after it was introduced to me in Christmas Eve. And I was doing some research into the kind of the process behind ChatGPT and how it works. And I was asking it a question in order to understand how it works. And what I asked it was, what is the difference between attention and positional encoding, which are two very niche concepts in AI? And it was very helpful. So yeah, I've been using it a lot since then, and it's been great.
So I always love to do one where we ask ChatGPT about itself because who doesn't like meta questions? I will say we never got that technical. So it was quite funny. We were prepping for this, and when I saw that question, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be outclassed by these students without any question." So, it is cool how we can actually ask it about itself, and it can respond in that natural language, which is awesome. And then Krisha, bring us home.
Hi, my name is Krishiv. I'm from Toronto, Canada. It's really awesome to be here. I'm so glad that all of you guys could join us today. The first time I used ChatGPT was in grade 9 geography class where we were doing a debate about capitalism pretty much for Marx. And we were allowed to have our laptops and Chromebooks open during the debate for research purposes. And I was on the side for capitalism. It was assigned by the teacher. And basically what happened was the other side just dropped the best argument ever, the best point ever. I had no idea how to refute it. All the people on my team were huddling together. We're like, okay, what are we going to do, guys? I have no idea what to say. So I went on ChatGPT and I basically put in the point that the other team had said and said, ChatGPT, come up with 3 refutations for this argument XYZ. It came up with the refutations. I used those. Not sure if it worked or not. Can't remember, but it was pretty fun though. But after that experience, I kind of did some more research into, the negative effects of using ChatGPT. Realized that it's not always great to depend on it for, things that take cognitive ability because it lowers your critical thinking skills. So now I mostly use it for feedback on my essays and articles.
Yeah, and it was really cool earlier when we were prepping about this idea of cognitive offload, which we talk about a lot, and this is something Krishiv as a 15-year-old has picked up as lingo, not very specific lingo, but I think that the way that you start with ChatGPT is often not the way that you end with ChatGPT. We become better at it and start to understand its limitations and its opportunities. So we have this amazing group of students that are alumni of the Knowledge Society, and this is an organization. So Damien's here. He'll put some information in the chat that brings students into the world of emerging technologies. And so even 2 years ago, AI was focused on machine learning models, and and it became in the last 7 months a step forward into what we call generative AI, which is this ability for natural language to be able to ask questions of an AI model and get back answers in natural language, right? Which is pretty amazing. So even before, as they were thinking about this, they were doing really deep work around AI. So it's one of the reasons why we have chosen this group. And so I'd love for you all to, in as non-technical a way as possible, to talk about the work that you have done and your area of focus, because we have an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So you're all in your different parts of your career. Krisha is just getting started. Isabella is ready for, I think, senior year, and Brooke is about to go to college. So we have this kind of trajectory as well, but would love to know, Brooke, what was your project and what's your passion around AI?
Yeah, for sure. So as you guys know, I'm an AI nerd. And so I actually got really into AI initially because there's a lot of math behind it. And then after I started learning more and more about it, I was really kind of interested in the privacy end of things, and specifically looking at kind of how we can protect all the data that is used to actually train these models, especially with large language models. We use lots and lots and lots of data to actually train the models, but we're not really kind of considering the fact that a lot of that data could be very sensitive. And so I find it very important to actually kind of protect that data in every way possible. So that's kind of what my research and interest has been throughout my time at TKS. So I've been specifically looking at something called federated learning, which essentially allows us to train AI models in a decentralized fashion, which essentially means that we have a bunch of devices. So it's your phone, your computer, your iPad, or whatever. It's constantly producing data, and we can take advantage of that by sending over models to these devices, having them train the model, and then sending updated parameters back to a central server that will then go through an aggregation process. And so that's the idea of around federated learning. And then on top of that, I've been looking at how we can apply different privacy preserving technologies like homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, and secure multi-party computation. And I'm really happy that I was able to share a lot of my research with a lot of people, specifically at a Google I/O event, which was really exciting. But yeah, so that's kind of what my interests are and kind of me nerding out with AI.
Well, you know what? I used to call myself a data nerd, and it was actually funny. On a webinar, I said that, and someone was really offended. But I actually think there's something to be said about really owning like the spaces in which we're really focused and passionate about. And what that may have been more technical than most. But what we'll do is in the feedback or the email tomorrow, we'll be including some work, including around the project, so you can see if you want to go to that deeper level around how people are thinking through privacy and how people are thinking through creating models that are better. We'll be able to share that as well. So thank you, Brooke. And then next, Isabella.
So I also started doing a lot of research into artificial intelligence since December, and I had no previous knowledge, so I started from scratch. I did a lot of research into how GPT works, and I basically coded GPT from scratch, and that helped me learn how each section works, how like the pros, the cons, the weaknesses of the model. It also helped me understand how the model is trained, which was very interesting to me. I also coded a convolutional neural network, which is basically what computers use to understand visual data, which is also pretty interesting. And currently I'm doing more research and more projects into how AI can be used in education, specifically to understand research papers and how it can be used to simplify the content on research papers. And I'm also going to be doing a lot more research into how artificial intelligence can be used in scientific research to create more efficiency and save time for scientists doing different tests.
Awesome. And so, along those lines, I think that what's really great here is that as you've been doing this, you're thinking about applications about who you are as well, but you're also going to go to school, I'm guessing, for science. So the work that you're doing is also probably going to help you when you get into those really, really deep layers of term papers and, research and all those pieces. That's really awesome. And then Krishiv.
Yeah, so when I started learning about AI at the Knowledge Society, I wasn't at first sure where I wanted to apply it to, because the cool thing about AI is that you can apply it to so many different industries and areas because it kind of works as an accelerator for a lot of these different industries, right? But one thing that inspired me though was when I started high school this year, I think I noticed more about the struggle of students around me. And after doing some more research on that, I realized that, even though students from the same city are going to the same school, there's going to be this achievement gap between students who are wealthier and needier due to the fact that our society has resources like private tutoring, which in Canada can cost between $30 to $90 an hour, which is something that's totally unaffordable to needier students. And that's why I founded something called aceflow.org, where we're essentially building tools and applications with generative AI that let students learn as if they're learning from their own private tutor, except it's not $30 to $90 an hour. It's way more cheaper than that. And the first tools that I actually built were free. So the first thing I built was something called Feedback AI. It's a Chrome extension, which instead of doing the essay for the students, it lets students upload their essay to Feedback AI and get actionable feedback on that essay as if they had their own English private tutor. And then after that, I realized, English isn't the only subject that students are learning. There's so many other subjects, and they even got to study for tests like the SAT now. So now I'm building a project which lets you input any curriculum. So a PDF of your curriculum, a PDF of your textbook, even a research paper, or link a curriculum, and then ask that questions and learn from it. So you get your own private tutor AI trained on your own curriculum, which lets you learn from anywhere around the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm talking to entrepreneurs all over the world, and some of them might be here today around similar applications. So, what's great about this is that I think that what you're talking about, Krishiv, is finding an application, a problem that you saw deeply around you, and then finding an application. In my world, when I was your age, I free tutored, right? That was my way of doing it. And so we've come so far in the 20 years where now you're able to create an application with great knowledge, but also how far we've come with the advancements that can now support hundreds of thousands of students. And I think that is really what we talk about right now with this opportunity for AI to not just, be something that can help you answer a question, but actually transform what personalized learning is, democratize access. And so I just love that that's something that you're already starting to think through. And we need so many more Brooks, Isabellas, and Christians doing this work, because you deeply understand what's the necessary like needs for students. So thank you so much. So we're going to go to the next question. So I don't know if you're a teacher here, but if you're a teacher here, hello, former teacher as well. So our first major kind of question is like, what do you want teachers to know about AI? So we have lots of different things happening, right? Number one, is it the best thing that ever happened or the worst thing that ever happened? Should we ban it? Should we not ban it? So from your perspective, especially since you're at different stages of your career, like Brooke, you're about to go to college. Isabella, you're going into like your kind of final year of like where you really have to think about applications to school around what you're doing. And then Krishna, you're just getting started. Like, what do you want teachers to know? If you can have them think about this strategically before they go back to the classroom or are in the classroom right now, what do you want to know, Brooke?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that teachers, I mean, I personally would like teachers to know is that I don't think it's necessarily important to actually ban ChatGPT. Actually, I think it would do more harm than good because students are ultimately going to use it anyways when they go home and do their assignments. So I think instead it should be used as, or it should be looked at like as a support tool that we can actually use to kind of help students along the process. The only thing I think is very important is to not use ChatGPT first thing and take away the critical skills, critical thinking skills whenever you get an assignment or a project of some sort. I think it's important to kind of promote students to think on their own when they're given like a prompt or some sort of a exercise so that they can actually exercise those skills and kind of make sure that they're constantly building those skills rather than like immediately going to ChatGPT, because I think that brings up the issue that sometimes they might actually be reliant on ChatGPT. And so every time they have an assignment, they're not able to actually kind of like exercise their own thinking and their own like kind of thoughts. Instead, they go completely to technology, which I don't think is good. But I think ChatGPT is good for like context and using it for hyper specific questions and problems that you may face when you're actually building the project and you already came up with the idea.
That's great. And I love that idea of it not being the starting place, but instead it's being that partner later on in the process as you're looking to refine or go deeper. And so that's a really good way to start contextualizing where this fits in the curriculum. Like it isn't necessarily the starting place, but it's the middle or the refining space that it can be really helpful. That's great. Isabella, what do you think? Like you have teachers here right now from across the world. What are you telling them?
So, okay, I feel that there's two main ways you can use AI. First of all, it's to help yourselves, right? AI can help you be more productive, to create lesson plans and very personalized like learning content for students. So for example, you can ask AI to create a project for 10-year-olds and adapt it to visual learners and auditory learners. And that way you have two completely different projects by simply creating a prompt, right? So it can save a lot of time for teachers, and that's a great thing. And it can also create a lot of personalized content, which is also a great thing for students and for people who are at different levels of expertise and who have different learning ways, like systems. I also think that they should incorporate it into the curriculums, as Brooke said, and not necessarily for them to use AI to replace their critical thinking, but to incorporate it into assignments. So for example, ask them to answer a prompt, I don't know, an essay prompt, and then ask AI to answer the prompt, and then ask the student to answer the prompt, and compare the differences between the two. So that way you kind of help the students to navigate through the tools and use them, but at the same time use their critical thinking, compare the two, and kind of analyze the weaknesses and the strengths of each of the both responses. So I think integrating AI and ChatGPT into school is very beneficial because ChatGPT is always going to exist. It's always going to be there. But at the same time, kind of keep the students engaged in their own thinking and keep them doing analysis, ask them about their past experiences, about more emotional questions, which make them think more and not rely on ChatGPT.
Great. And so just to echo, so the idea of not relying is really, I think, the commonality between what Brooke and Isabella have said. But I'm just going to pull out a couple of things that are really important that I think that you've pinpointed, Isabella. One is this idea of like Bloom's taxonomy. We think about the higher order thinking skills. that are really important around that novel application of knowledge, right? And one of the great ways to do that is to have students compare and contrast and improve the work that they're doing. And that's, that idea that the student answers a prompt, the ChatGPT answers prompts, and then that ability to compare. It's really cool. And I know that Krishnov, I don't want to take away his thunder, but he's going to talk a little bit about hallucinations in a moment. But it also is a great way to kind of spot the limitations that ChatGPT has right now. And so to be able to show that in a really deep, meaningful way is really great. And I think that, when we think about what we're thinking of as educators is that it's so much, it's like what Isabella said, it's not going away. And so to fight it is going to be a losing battle. So how do you incorporate it effectively? And so Deborah asked a question in the Q&A about students, or actually our next question will be focused on students. So, I think that you've already gotten to that, but we're really going to focus on how you guys use it and how it can be used with students in a moment. So not to take Krishna's thunder, but what would you want students to know? What would you like teachers to know about AI right now?
The most important starting point for this would be that we need to agree on that AI is here to stay, right? It's technology that's only rapidly developing. It's not going to stop developing. It's not going to stop growing. And because of this, just kind of like how Brooke kind of touched up on when she was talking was, students are going to use AI when they go home anyways, if they really want to use it, right? So even if you ban it at school, students are still going to find a way to use it. And I think the best example of this is in my school. I go to school in the Appeal District School Board, and over here, Discord is banned. However, since Discord got banned, I saw more and more students using VPNs. So now everyone just uses Discord in class anyways via VPN, and they can do the same thing with ChatGPT if they really wanted to. So I think the solution isn't just banning these applications, knowing that students are going to use it anyways. I think the solution is raising more awareness and educating students on why they shouldn't be using it in the first place. For example, growing up in schools from preschool to even now in grade 9 during health class, I've learned about, vaping and why that's wrong for the body. So why can't we learn about relying on AI and why that's wrong for the brain, right? So I think that's really important to raise awareness about how relying on AI is going to reduce your critical thinking, and the term cognitive offload, which I know Amanda likes bringing up, which is a really important term to know, and the real reasoning behind why we shouldn't use AI, not just because it's unreliable, but also because it's taken away from our own critical thinking and our development as human beings, especially when you're a teenager in that growing stage.
Oh man, I know you're speaking to the choir right now about this idea of also vaping bad, but this idea of actually having it be explicit in the curriculum of the pros and cons of this. I was actually speaking today to a wonderful filmmaker who, had done work around the social dilemma, right? The social dilemma came out years and years after social media. And what happened is students like yourselves and adults were deeply impacted in terms of how that impacted their self-image, their growth, their comfort and society. And, we've seen eating disorders increase. We've seen issues with suicidal ideation, body dysmorphia, et cetera. But we have this opportunity right now to not have that same issue, because we know right now that there are going to be impacts of this. And so why can't we talk about them strategically and teach students and teachers how to have those conversations in productive manners? So I just think that is such a beautiful point. And, it also, do you mind, out there to anybody, actually, when we talk about unreliable, we talk about hallucination. So what is a hallucination, and how do you think that impacts the way that students and teachers should be using AI? I know this is a little bit off book, but does anybody want to fill that question?
I can take this if you want.
Let's do it.
Sure. Okay. So I think it's important to note that LLMs like ChatGPT, their job is basically to add or predict one word at a time as it types back to you. And what it does is it says things and creates things that looks like it makes sense, right? That's basically a job, right? It predicts words that follow along to string a pattern of words to create paragraphs and essays that look like they make sense. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually true. And that's kind of where hallucinations come into play. So when you start relying on platforms like ChatGPT for information, you start to realize that, especially for math, for example, ChatGPT sucks at math because ChatGPT is a large language model, the word language, right? It's been trained on this corpus of data of all these, passages and words on the internet and from books on words, right? Not necessarily math. That's why if you give ChatGPT math word problems, it's not always going to do the best job. And if students knew this, they'd realize that cheating with ChatGPT would probably get them a worse mark than if they actually did the math in their head, right? And then also the fact that ChatGPT is training data. So just to step back for a bit, these models, they are trained with a lot of data, right? That's how they're able to speak kind of like a human in a sense. They have this vast amount of data of billions and billions of words from the internet. Now, this data on ChatGPT, for example, is limited. It doesn't go up to yesterday, to 2023. So if you ask it a question that's relevant to 2023, such as who won the soccer game in 2023, for example, it's going to make it up and it's going to say something that just seems like it makes sense. So for example, if let's say Canada keeps winning a game for a couple of years, it's probably just going to say Canada because it looks like and seems like it makes sense, but that isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think that we talk about this, that, you know, it looks like it's right. So it can do math right because it has seen that equation over, like 2 and 2 equals 4 across millions of different data points in the internet, right? But when it does a complex piece of math, it can't, right? And it will approximate. And so, and exactly, like if you know, who won the Ballon d'Or, if you like, clearly like soccer, it's going to say Messi maybe, or like it's someone that also has gotten it a lot of times instead of actually knowing it. So that's a really beautiful example. So what we're going to do is we're actually now going to shift into what we talked about teachers and, you know, this, you know, the tension between supporting students, you know, and also making sure that they're not having cognitive offload, that it's a partnership, it's not a starting place. So now you're talking to students. So what do you want students to know? And we're going to start with Brooke, and then we're going to go to Krishiv, and then Isabella, we're actually going to go into some live prompt engineering. And so do you want to start, Brooke?
Yeah, for sure. So I think Krisha mentioned the point I was actually going to bring up is that oftentimes with ChatGPT, it is a very, very convincing way of making it sound like everything they're talking about is right, but it's not always right. So as a student, I often like to tell my other friends, like, yes, it's a good tool, but always make sure that you're fact checking if it seems like it could potentially be wrong, because more often than not, it is like correct, but sometimes there'll be like tiny things that are just like, that's not technically correct. And it's interesting because if you ever are like learning about something very like for me, for example, when I was doing my stuff with TKS, there's obviously like a knowledge gap between like what I'm learning, or like where I'm at and what I'm learning. And so when I consult like experts on LinkedIn and I asked them for advice, and then when I asked ChatGPT, sometimes there'll be like differences, and then so you kind of have to like learn how to like pick those out and make sure that you're like extracting the correct information. Another piece of advice is not to rely on it to like write essays, because oftentimes when you actually need to put citations in your essays, that will not actually be correct either. So I know for like one of my essays, one of my friends, she actually used like a lot of ChatGPT to write her whole like essay because we were doing the IB diploma. So one of the IB essays, and then she actually had to message the teacher afterwards and say, hey, can I resubmit? Because all my citations were wrong. The quotes weren't actually in the novel. And so it's important that you're not just like mindlessly using this as like a device, because it's not as smart as you think it is. It's just trained on data and predicts what the optimal response will be based off of your question and based off of its training and over a certain amount of time. So it's important to kind of like be able to understand that and not take everything it says as like, yes, this is 100% correct. So yeah.
Oh man, well, at least she caught it before it got submitted. I know there are, you know, it's been a doctor that's gotten in trouble. There's been multiple lawyers that have gotten in trouble. And I think that this is the place though, where, you know, when we think about it from the AI for education standpoint, is that this is where like ChatGPT is not fully fit for purpose for schools yet, because it's like you talk about, you know, difference between a LinkedIn expert and you know, ChatGPT. Not everyone has a LinkedIn expert that will talk to them. They talk to you, Brooke, for a good reason. And so the level of knowledge and nuance, right, that you have to have around some of these hallucinations, it will look so right, and you will believe it, and then you will submit it, or you even be a teacher and talking about something that maybe isn't fully true. So I think that really is what we think a lot about in terms of, you know, really like getting closer to having better tools for the classroom, whereas ChatGPT just isn't quite there yet, but we hope that it will be. So awesome. Okay, Krishiv's going to go next. So what do you want students to know? Give me some practical examples too.
Sure. I think Brooke summarized it really well, honestly. There's those two main factors of number one, you shouldn't be relying on it completely because it is going to make up information, right? Because it's just creating things and saying things that looks like it makes sense. And then number two, there's also the issue of which I want to emphasize more, of it just being bad for you, right? If you rely on, ChatGPT and AI to do all this work for you and all these tasks for you, then I think it's fine for, automatable tasks or tasks that can be automated, such as if every day you have to submit something that isn't for school, it isn't for school, so it's not academic dishonesty, but it's something that, is just a mundane task for you. For example, you have to create like a write-up for something. I think that's fine. But when it goes to things that are supposed to help you critically think, that's when the problem occurs. Now, in school, the reason why we have essays and the reason why we have research assignments in school is because we're in these growing stages where we need to have these cognitive abilities and need to develop these critical thinking skills in order to, so that when we grow up and go into our careers, we're able to actually think for ourselves. Now, if we rely on ChatGPT for all this information, we need to realize that this is going to lower our critical thinking skills. This is going to lower our critical development, especially at this stage and age. And that's what I want students to know the most, that relying on this information and just having these AI systems do all the work for you is going to lower who you are as a human being, honestly.
So I'm going to throw a curveball again, because this is,
Sure.
I think, really interesting. So school doesn't work for everyone, though, right? It doesn't work for everyone. And so I know that some students and some adults are using this because of, like, maybe it really is hard to write an essay, or maybe it really isn't a flow state for people to be able to do that. So how would you think about like a student that like really struggles to write essays? Like, it would be so much easier to just put a prompt in and get an essay. Like, how do you talk to those students? I mean, that's a hard question. So, but do you have any ideas of how you would talk to someone that it could really be helpful, but they still need to be thoughtful about that approach?
I think that's a very good question, and you bring up a very valid point. Like sometimes like it's really hard to like control each student to like actually like be able to like not use ChatGPT or AI in general to help them with whatever they're doing. But I think for those students, it's important to kind of like identify them and work with them and help them through the process, because again, like not everyone's mind thinks the same way. Like sometimes people are more on like the math end of things, and their mind is able to think critically in math, which is amazing. And sometimes it's more of like the arts and social sciences, and that's completely okay too. But I think either way, at the end of the day, I don't really think that you should be using AI in general. Like even if your mind doesn't work or like is not very artsy, I still don't think it's the best decision to use it in any way to help you with like an area like in social sciences or arts. And the same with math, obviously with math, but like specifically social sciences. So I do think that that conversation is important to have with like students in general, but like for those students who are really, really struggling and would see it as a tool, I think working with them like individually might be beneficial, and kind of just showing them, like Krishav said, and showing them the risks to using AI and being reliant on the technology.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I will say that like we have to kind of situate ourselves as with privilege, right? So everyone here is clearly, like you guys are brilliant and able to communicate. And so, but it always is important for us to take that step back, especially when we're trying to create something that works for everyone. That is something that is going to be, there are opportunities, like you said, for personalizing to take that time. But I do think that there are these opportunities where I think of Isabella, like, if you're thinking about, some complex things, having it translated for you potentially into your native language, or like actually thinking about the ways in which it can partner with you. And so one thing I don't want to leave people with is that, cognitive offload is bad, but like thought partnership is good. Like not to Krisha's earlier point, like not everyone has that tutor, right? And that ability to do that. But like, how do you find that there's like a middle space? We talk about being responsibly optimistic. Like what is the middle space in which you can not do something where you're not thinking, you're not building those skills, and you're not creating those neural networks and those skills for the future. But how are you also getting that democratized step up that you might not have already gotten because of where you grew up, where you're from, and your background? So yeah. I think that's really an interesting space, and that's perfect for Isabella. Do you want to take that? And then
because Brooke and Krishiv, they did a very good job of talking about like the warnings. But I'm also very hopeful about like how we can use AI in the classroom and to learn new things. I've been using it for a while, and it has been helping me. So I wanted to share some ways I've been using it, and it can be used by students also in a way that doesn't jeopardize their critical thinking. So first of all, I love to use ChatGPT to understand very specific and niche stuff. So, for example, I was learning about AI, and there's things that are very, very hard to find on the internet and that are very hard to understand for me. So I simply use ChatGPT to go deep into that and understand it and ask follow-up questions. Because when a teacher is not available, then ChatGPT is a good replacement of like some support that you have when you're learning hard stuff, when you're challenging yourself. So I don't think using ChatGPT to do your job is a good thing, but it can be a good like support when you're doing hard things. When you're doing an essay, for example, as Krishiv said, it can help you to give you feedback. Or another way that I use it is, for example, if I wanted to learn code during the summer, I can ask ChatGPT to create a study guide for me and put together resources that I can use to learn Python in 2 months. And it's great at that. It'll put together a good plan with time stamps, and like it's a good way to complement what I'm doing and to help me save time and things that would require like a lot of time, but not really a lot of critical thinking. So it's very good at that. But then I go ahead and I learn the code myself. So it's like recognizing what it should be used for and what it shouldn't be used for is a very good skill that we should also start training. And also it's something that teachers should start teaching in school. But I definitely think that there's a way to use it for the good, to like benefit you in your learning process.
Awesome. And so I know, Brooke, like, why don't you, I think Brooke has something to say, but do you want to pull up your screen, Isabella? And let's actually show. So if you've been to our website, we have a prompt library. So now we have the 2 newest prompts that are developed by these wonderful students. And so we're going to actually place one of the prompts into the chat. And so you can see our prompt library on the right of our screen. And so the way this is designed is it's got like this is a help me understand prompt, and then we have the example prompt that was written by Isabella, and then you can actually see some of the examples were actually supported by Brooke in this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have Isabella actually show you how she would do this live.
Okay, so this is an example of a prompt that I used this year. I was reading Macbeth, and English isn't my native language, so understanding Macbeth and like the language it's written in is very hard for me. So I used ChatGPT as a support. So I created this prompt, which includes some context of who I am and what the purpose of this prompt is. So I'm an 11th grader, and I want to understand this passage from Macbeth. So I gave it enough context, and now I'm going to go ahead and copy the specific excerpt from Macbeth. Let's say I want this excerpt, and I'm going to paste it into my prompt. So a very good thing that we can do is to feed in some information to ChatGPT for it to help us. Like if I only said, explain Act 1, Scene 2, it would probably not give a very like precise response. But if I give it the specific context, then it's going to be much easier to get a good answer. So I pasted in the specific excerpt I want to understand, and then I'm going to submit this prompt, and let's see what it responds.
And I think that just, Isabella, just, a really good one for teachers to do with students is do this twice, once without the passage and once with the passage, and see how much deeper you can get in that analysis. So, yeah. So
as you can see, I have a very detailed description of what the passage is talking about. It still has a very complex language. It still has a lot of like Shakespeare jargon. So maybe I'm going to ask it to simplify the vocabulary a little more to make it easier for me to understand it. So I'm just going to type in return the same summary, but with more simple language. And let's see what it responds. I don't know, Brooke or Krishiv, what do you think? How do you think we can continue to go deeper?
So I think that this is like a very good idea to use it for, especially because Shakespeare is so complicated. Like I literally hate reading Shakespeare, but I think in general, if you're like reading a research paper, or if you're like reading a really like article or a blog that makes like not a lot of sense, and even like if you're reading like really complex math papers, often what I'll do is I basically do what Isabella did, and I'll just say, can you explain this to me in simple terms? And then it breaks it down. And then if I still don't understand it, then I'll take the parts that still don't make sense, and then it gives even more specific, like a specific explanation of it. So I think it can be used not only for like English passages, but also for like research. And I actually find it very beneficial because a lot of times, what I found, even as a student in high school, beyond like what I was doing at TKS, obviously was a little bit more difficult. But even when I was just in high school and I was reading like reading research papers to kind of finish my assignments, a lot of times those research papers were far above the curriculum and outside of what we were learning at school. And it's really, difficult to fill in those gaps, like when you don't really have the resources and that your teachers aren't really familiar with the specific topic either. So what I will do, what I did was I would copy and paste and just like kind of like cross-reference like that. And oftentimes it made a lot of sense and it really, really helped. So that's like kind of like, I really like using it for research in that sense as well. So.
That is great. But do you mind coming off, Isabella? And I love that these conversations are great because also you kind of riff off each other and kind of say, well, oh, I could use it for this. And like what I loved was I asked everyone, they're so lovely, to build a prompt, and actually found that Isabella's and Brooke's were similar enough to put together because there are these themes that I think can be really, really good, especially around, Krish's is actually around like studying, like creating practice tests for like, and using the same approach of uploading a piece of text or content or curriculum. And so I think that we can start to theme out these areas in which we can use it that really are good places to start. And as Katie, I was making a joke about sorry English teachers, was more about not liking Shakespeare because I still remember having to learn Shakespeare and struggling a little bit myself. I wouldn't have minded a little bit of extra help. But we're kind of coming up on time. So we always do this where we bring us right to 6:45, which is the end of the session, or wherever you are. If you're in Australia, it's 8:45 in the morning. And so what we'll do is I'm going to ask Dan to put in the chat like the feedback for today, if you don't mind, but we're going to go to the end of the hour so you can ask questions. We already have questions in the Q&A that we're going to answer. But before we do that, I want everyone here, if you have an open platform, you have one thing that you can tell a policymaker, OpenAI, or whoever you want that they will listen to about what needs to happen at this stage of AI to support students like you and also students just in general. So what would that be, Brooke?
How can AI support students? I think, like I mentioned, I think like it's important to like remove any of the actual critical thinking that is like needed to complete an assignment. So I think what that could look like is actually giving the student the assignment, removing technology, and then having them answer the question, and then actually being able to like think of an actual solution, and then to fill in the gaps and to actually fill in the content in the context of the actual your idea. I think that's when you can actually use ChatGPT. Like I think it's more important to, like I mentioned, use it as a support tool rather than something that's actually doing all the work for you.
Right. And I'm just going to also throw you, I know you love privacy. Is there something about privacy that you would like to talk about as well?
Yeah, so I think like it's important that policymakers and like people who are actually like providing this technology like OpenAI with ChatGPT, I think it's really important that we do consider the privacy implications of students and people in general actually just using the technology as a whole, because oftentimes, I think people forget that they're participating their data to this training process when they're typing and using ChatGPT. So it's important that, as a company and as a government body, you're protecting the citizens and the people using the products. And so I think it's important, especially in Canada, the United States, because this is it's not being done at the level it should be done to actually protect data. So I personally think that the data should be protected. So looking into like research of like FL or different technologies that are already being researched and adopted by other big tech companies. And I think that will make parents, make teachers, and make students themselves more confident using this technology, knowing that there's people behind them ensuring the protection of their data and their privacy when they're actually kind of using this technology. Because right now where it's at, it's not super it's not where it should be at, especially with OpenAI's privacy efforts. It's not where it should be at, in my opinion, and also in the opinions of a lot of experts who are much more knowledgeable and intelligent in this area than me. So
who are those people? I don't believe those people exist, Brooke. And so that's really, really great. And, I think we believe that we should have better solutions for students, teachers, for parents, for everyone. And I think that, that is something that's so important for us as in a community to put pressure on the right places to say, like, we need it to be better, because it's really like, you guys are the most important. Like, your privacy is the most important thing we could protect, besides your braids, which we want to protect as well. So Isabella, you have this is your soapbox. I have it for you. What would you like to tell policymakers or anyone about, if you could have one thing that you could have for students like you, what would it be?
So first of all, one thing I would say to policymakers is, I recently heard a quote that says that your AI won't replace your job, but people who know about AI and know how to use it will. So we have to prepare our students and our society for a world that uses AI. And part of that is including AI in the curriculums and teaching students how to use AI for their advantage. So I think AI should be part of school and part of the classes. But like teaching them how to use all these tools in the correct way is also very important. And then another thing that I would also like to communicate to policymakers and OpenAI would be to create models and create more tools and chatbots for students to be able to get that help they need without jeopardizing their critical thinking. So tools that not necessarily do their job and write their essays, but are made specifically for giving feedback, for creating study guides, for creating sample questions. So fine-tuning models specifically for students would be also very beneficial to incorporate them into our education without like all the risks of using the normal large language models that we're using today.
Yeah, and so this is the challenge, right? And so Merlin Mind just supported. They just released a press release that they had their first education specific large language model. So maybe we'll have another conversation when you guys have tried it out in August. But I do think that there is something to be said about, like, it goes even deeper. And Isabella, I'm thinking about this right now. Like, how can we think about this of like, and I'm sure Christian might have an answer since he's building this space, but like, how do you create a chatbot that like is an AI like tutor that gives just enough and support, and it never gets tired and is always patient and doesn't care who you are, but also doesn't give you the answer? Because I know a lot of what we have right now is that it'll give you the answer if you ask it hard enough. If you ask it enough times, it'll probably just give you the answer, which maybe your teacher would too, because you've asked it 10 times. But I think that this is really interesting to think about. So Krishav, I'll let you take it home in this sense of like the one thing you want people to know.
Building off of what you just said, I think it's really important for models to be created for students that don't just give away the answer, but just like how a tutor would, guide you to the answer, right? So what Christina just mentioned in the chat was Khan Academy is already doing this with Khanmigo, which is absolutely true. So what Khanmigo lets you do is if a student says something like, oh, I'd love the answer to this, or what's the answer to this? Instead of just giving away the answer like a tutor, it's going to walk them through the question, clear up the gaps in their knowledge, then actually make them understand how to solve the answer and get to the answer so that they can do that on their own, right? And I think right now with the tool that I'm building at aceflow.org, I think one of the most important things to emphasize with AI for education is that a lot of us here and a lot of the talk in general for AI in education has been about the students, but I think there needs to be more talk about the teachers, because I think something really important about, shaping education for the future and making it better for the future. It can't just revolve around the students, because teachers are always going to be there, and teachers are going to be the ones who are guiding, students to success. So I think tools like helping teachers create practice tests, create criteria, create rubrics, etc., and automate these processes for the teachers so that they can free up their time to focus on the students is really important. Because at the end of the day, a human teacher, at least for now, is still so much more important and so much more vital for students, especially in like kindergarten and younger grades, for growing up than AI will be in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think that, what's so great here is that you're resituating it back. That I think I'll take it even further. It needs to be a partnership. Like students and teachers need to come together to have these conversations. And, that's where we're going to get the best, because sometimes what happens is like teachers and students are on opposite sides, right? And we don't know how to communicate with each other. And what ends up happening is a new technology or new thing, we get like quite like it becomes a fight and then it becomes an opportunity. So maybe my thing that I want everyone to know is that like this is our opportunity to really partner around what AI is going to mean for the future of learning. Like this is our opportunity. Like these are 3 students of millions and millions that are thinking about this in some way, shape, or form already. And while they are technically savvy and articulate and all these things that sometimes students aren't, it doesn't mean that it isn't a great conversation you can have with every student, that there are neurodiverse students. There are students from different backgrounds. There are students that have never used technology and actually maybe are afraid of it or afraid of like it replacing them or their thinking too. And so I think that this is that opportunity for us to come together and to make sure that there are always students in the center and always teachers in the center, especially around this intersection of AI and education. So that's my soapbox that I'll come off of. But okay, so we have a couple questions. Thank you for those that are staying here. Those of us that had to leave, I just want to reach out to Brooke and Isabella and Krisha and say we've got the future is safe with these guys. You've got, I love this so much. All of our teachers need to see and listen to these students. I just want you all to know that, it's really hard to get up here and talk about these things, especially in something so new. So it's just amazing to have you here. So we're going to answer a couple questions. So I'm going to pick, we're not going to have time for everything, unfortunately, but maybe we do this again. I don't know if hopefully it was a good experience and they'll come back and talk with me again. Okay, so what do you think about, okay, this is a good one. So from Katie, excuse me. So what's your advice for teachers that are just like, ban it, I don't want anything to do with it. It's just not what I want in my classroom and it's not what I want students to have. So we're not going to all have the opportunity to answer each one, but does someone really care about this one? It looks like maybe Brooke.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Katie, and I can understand the concern. And I think a lot of teachers, especially at my school, were kind of in the same boat where they were like completely against it. And I do see the concern, but I think at the same time, it's kind of inevitable that it's going to be part of our like how we run education now. So I think trying to go against it is kind of the wrong approach, but I can see why you might be doing that, and that's completely okay. I just think that I think that we should go into it and kind of figure out how we can use it to our benefit rather than see it as something that can actually be detrimental. So again, I think it's important to, have assignments where we can exercise critical thinking skills, and then again, just use it as something to help us fill in the blanks and for the context uses. But the actual thinking and coming up with ideas should be completely on our own.
That's great. And so I'm gonna go to Krisha and to Isabella because there are a couple questions about this, and it's something that I'm thinking about right now. So how do you create, so you have academic honesty policies, and you think about accessible use, how do you do that? So should students be citing ChatGPT? Should they be showing prompts? What do you think is the best way to, especially going in the school year, or those in Australia they're about to go back? What do you think that should be a part of that academic policy? It's a hard question.
Sure, I could take this. So there were a few headlines a couple months ago about this one professor in a university who teaches, English and research, who has his students submit an essay created by ChatGPT and then submit an essay that they edited from ChatGPT to make their own. And of course, both the essays, there's going to be huge contrast between them because a lot of changes have been made to actually make a compelling essay. And I think the really cool thing about that is not only are all students coming forth with their ChatGPT generated content, but they're also showing the teacher their critical thinking skills and evaluating what ChatGPT got wrong, what ChatGPT didn't do effectively, and then changing that in their newfound essay. And I see this as a pretty effective strategy. And I also think that citing kind of where you get a lot of your information from, whether it be from ChatGPT or Perplexity.ai, whatever AI source you're using, is going to be really important, especially in the future, because we already know that AI is here to stay, and a lot of us here are already using it to research for assignments. So I was actually participating in this essay contest from Kaggle recently, and Kaggle being, a data science company, they're actually, they do advocate for AI and data science in general, right? And so they actually had students who were, participating in the essay competition as cite their sources, whether or not they use AI, and clearly kind of illustrate and label how they used AI. And as we do know, there are a lot of AI detectable AI detectable websites as well. Kind of, there's this one website called detectable.ai, I believe, and I'm pretty sure OpenAI is also working on their own, if I'm not mistaken. And even GPT-0, for example, which are tools to let teachers and let leaders in educational institutions make sure that students are submitting work that is not AI generated but human generated.
That's great. And that's a good segue into, and I think Isabella has something, but we're actually doing next week is rethinking cheating. And so we're not using GPT, like people that are building GPT detectors actually, because those are shown to be very unreliable and actually penalize non-native English speakers. So we're actually looking at proof of effort and tools that are designed to show like what is truly original, so to speak. So that's a really good segue. But Isabella, maybe you'll bring us home. So, like, what should be included? Like, you were thinking about your high school teachers. What do you want them to include in that acceptable use policy?
So I think first of all, shifting the way we grade students. So not that memory based, not that like fact checking, but more about the critical thinking. So ask them about past experiences and how those experiences help them think a different way. Ask them to analyze a text, but without like that much attention to like the numbers and the details, but like ask them about their personal reaction to the text, and like maybe ask them to respond like orally to different questions and create a discussion in class and grade students based on that. So like creating an atmosphere in which it's hard to use AI to like replace you, because it's going to be very tempting for students to do so. But if teachers motivate students and bring them down a path in which they don't necessarily need the AI to like do the work for them, I think that's the best way to create like class content and class activities for the students to like exercise their critical thinking and their analysis and everything.
That's great. And actually today we were talking about building a toolkit around creating like taking traditional assessments and then having like an AI assisted version of the assessment. So that thought partner one, and then like an AI resistant version, which is one that you would do that would actually not be able to be done or shouldn't be able to be done with AI. But that doesn't mean it's a traditional assessment, right? Because the traditional assessment, potentially like the 5-paragraph essay, is going to have to change to be more like part of our lives going forward because of the ability of generative AI already. Well, okay, so absolutely want to say thank you so much to our panel. I think everyone here is ready to like be your biggest fans. I know I am. I'm ready to, like I said, you can always, will you hire me in your next company? Like, because I definitely would learn so much from you all. I also want to say thank you to Damien and the whole TKS team, who are just amazing and has really been so supportive in this work. And I just would hope that this helps everyone rethink and reassociate, because Christian said we're not thinking about teachers, but we are thinking about teachers first in this. And everywhere you see, it's actually teachers first, not students first. It's like, how do we stop kids from cheating instead of how do we help students get the most out of this potential amazing step forward with cautionary optimism. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to our panel. Yeah, it's just been so great. And everyone should read, the guys should read how much everyone enjoyed it as well. Just bask in the glory of like teachers from around the world appreciating your insights. But thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a great day, and thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you so much for having us. It was such a pleasure.